Hello, Internet. Welcome to the James Murua Literary Podcast. I'm your host, James Murua, and today I have the guests Maaza Mengiste and Antje Rvik Strubel. There will be a guest for the next hour or so, hopefully. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And it's because I want to hear how they introduce themselves. I don't like introduce others. So maybe we start with you, the one who's the most nearest to me, Maaza.
Okay. Hi, James. Hello, Antje. It's a pleasure to be here. I am a novelist, James. I am also a nonfiction writer, but I would call myself a historical novelist and a researcher, because most of my novels require a lot of research. And I'm the latest book I've written is The Shadow King.
Okay. Antje?
Yeah, I'm also, thank you for having me. I'm also be here. I'm basically, although I also wrote radio plays and a theater play. Actually, when I started out, I wanted to be a playwright, but every time I start, it turns out to be a novel again. So there's not much hope there. I also translate from English and Swedish, and I wrote actually 3, you could call them travel essays, and one of them is maybe a bit special. It's about skiing.
Okay. So both of you have more than one novel. You've been in the game for a minute. And first of all, Maaza, I have to ask you, have you recovered from Barack Obama cheating your...
Kind of, yes. It's helped me actually in these days after the elections in the US. It still gives me some hope. So I'm holding on to it.
Okay, so we're in the house with somebody who gets tweeted by Barack Obama. Antje, have you been tweeted by Angela Merkel or anybody that we need to?
Actually, I'm not tweeting, so I don't know. Messages don't reach me.
Yeah, you're those writers that don't do social media.
Exactly.
Yes, I know.
I mean, I have a website, but that's as far as it goes.
That's probably best. I think you get more writing done than the rest of us.
Exactly.
Yes. So, Maaza, you're in the next few days, you're going to be up for the Booker Prize. First of all, congratulations. We know you win. No pressure. Now, we are really sorry. Tell us about The Shadow King for those who may not know about it.
The Shadow King is set in 1935 during Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia. It tells the story from both the Ethiopian side and the Italian side. One thing I realized or I discovered during research is that women were heavily involved in this war. And once I brought women into the story, it became something about not only just the war against fascism, but the war that women often have to fight to protect themselves, to protect their bodies and their independence.
Okay, Antje, would you like to, okay, we have somebody here. Please tell us about some of your writing.
Maybe first I want to refer to The Shadow King, because what I really liked about the book was that this idea that women have always, or for way too long, been actually the Shadow King. And now it's time to pull them out of this shadow and put them in the limelight. And what you said, I mean, about women have to actually, when they're soldiers, they're fighting more difficult battles than the men have to, because they're fighting on 2 fronts. One is the enemy of the army, and one is the inner enemy in the army, their own men, basically. So this was interesting to me, especially also because I'm just now translating an essay by Virginia Woolf, one of her political essays called 3 Guineas, and she deals with the question of, or with the connection between masculinity and war. And in 1933, shortly before the Second World War, she wrote this essay, actually saying that what women can do to prevent war is to get rid of patriarchal structures, because they cause war. And this is, at this time, of course, very visionary. And so that's why I found this interesting to read.
Thank you so much. That's very generous.
Yes. So, Antje, I mean, your first novel was Offender Blender. Offender Blunder. Have I got that right?
It's like Open Shutters, exactly, yeah.
Open
That's
Shutters.
a long time ago. I wrote that I published it. It's published in 2001, so it's a long time ago.
And there's something that you did when you published this book. You added Rávik to your identity. Would you like to mention something about that? Is this something writers do in Germany?
No, I think I'm the only one who did that particular thing, because it's also very, like, the unusual thing is that my real name is Antje Strubel, and I put Rávik in the middle of it. So it's not a pseudonym really. It's just an additional name. And I made up this name because I wanted to put something out. Want to give my existence as a writer, or how I feel when I write a name. Like when it's going very well when I write, then I feel like I'm getting outside of myself a bit. Like I'm turning into somebody else, but this is not really somebody. It's more like a way of being or something, some existence that you can't really describe. And this is Rávik. So I thought it would be, like, I wanted it on the books too. And I caused some trouble because now booksellers don't know to put the book under the letter R or under the letter S. But okay, by now they maybe might have figured it out.
Yeah, but by now it's okay because it was a while back.
Exactly.
Maaza, have you had any issues with identity in the period that since your first book came out?
Well, there have been a few, but actually I'd like to ask Antje, what does Rávik mean? Does it have a special meaning for you?
No, I wanted it actually to have no meaning, to just have a certain sound. And the sound resembles, in a way, my feelings in this kind of being outside of myself.
How wonderful.
But it has to do, of course, also with naming something, that as me naming something, because when you publish, you always get labeled, or you get you get a name or a label or a category from outside. So I wanted to put something out before it comes at me, something from outside.
That's really interesting, and that goes right into James' question about when I first published. No, the booksellers, they have to categorize your book. I was technically American writer. I live here. I'm an American citizen, but my book is Ethiopian. And I would find sometimes that I would be moved into African section, or I would moved into the general literature section. Sometimes they would put me in the Egyptian section, which I thought was always interesting. There was one other writer, Mengiste, who had published a couple of years before me. And when I would go to bookstores for readings or to sign books, they would bring Dinau's book out instead of mine. So there were all these confusions that were happening, being an Ethiopian writer and being the second to be published so widely. They really couldn't tell us apart or our books apart, and they weren't sure how to categorize this. And 10 years ago, I think that we were having all these discussions about what is an African writer, and I got very bored with those discussions, and I find them redundant and not really inspiring at all, because we will constantly have these questions, and it will always come down to, well, it's whatever the writer calls themselves, and we just need to move on, and people just need to read our books.
Yeah, that's the problem with labeling.
Ladies, you can ask questions as well. Don't be shy.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. I think there's always, like, the problem with labeling is it makes you visible in a certain way, but it makes you invisible in another way. So it limits you. And it happened to me too, because I come from East Germany. So from the beginning I published, I was, of course, always the East German author. And it became a bit ridiculous when, I don't know, my fourth book, I think, didn't have anything to do with East and West Germany. Like my earlier books deal with friction between East and West and the problems, how can two people from two totally different worlds now finding themselves in one world get along and all these things. But then my book was dealing with totally different questions. And then one reviewer read this book with the lens of East German topics. And out came a totally ridiculous review because it had nothing to do with East Germany. So it narrows the perception of a book and narrows the perception, of course, of me as a writer and of you too. But actually, I wanted to ask you, are you expected now to only write about Ethiopian topics?
I think that might be the general perception, that this is what I will do. It's not a limitation or any kind of expectation I've put on myself. I've been writing what interests me. So who knows? Before I was writing about the revolution in Ethiopia or this book, I was writing short stories, which I don't think they got published, but I was working on a book about jazz musicians in Los Angeles, completely different. So, and it's still something I'm interested in. Who knows what will happen next, but I think people expect it because they feel safer in knowing what to expect from other people, what to expect from writers, but it's not, we'll see what happens. Yeah, but I do think it's expected. What about you?
Antje, you said, I noticed you grew up in East Germany. Maaza mentioned this issue about being an African writer, whether you live in Africa, whether you live in diaspora, whether you write in English, or do you have any of those kind of hang-ups apart from the East-West issue in Germany?
Apart? What do you mean? Like another label? I mean, there are all sorts of labels.
Apart from the issue of you grew up in Eastern Germany, and so there is that issue of the divide of somebody who grew up in western part of the country and eastern part of the country. Are there other divides or issues that a writer like yourself has to deal with?
There are all sorts of issues. I mean, but it depends on what are we talking about. I mean, there are always there's also the issue of writing as an, of course, but I'm kind of tired of talking about that. That's of course a big deal.
Same issue.
But that's not limited to me. It's the same everywhere, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I mean. Yeah, I have no. I can't come.
I mean, the reason I'm asking you this is because a lot of people on the continent of Africa, we have this issue where we think we are the only ones with the biggest issues that are happening over and over again. So, like she mentioned here, it's about identity of the writer. Sometimes it's about the languages, what languages they use to write in. And I wanted to see if this was a universal problem or it's just an African writer problem.
No, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question if you look at people who don't write in their native tongue. I mean, it's only a recent phenomenon in Germany that you find more and more writers who grew up somewhere else or came as kids to Germany and start writing in German. And that, I think, opened up the German literary field a lot. Like, it enriched literature because, of course, it's a different influences you feel also in the German. There's one writer I can think of from Russia who plays actually with Russian in her text. There's a famous, but she has been writing in Germany for a long time, like originally Japanese writer who plays with her language background in German. So it enriches the language and it enriches also the stories that we read about. But it's a rather new phenomenon, I have to say. Germany is very slow in that compared to the States, let's say.
I know that the German publishing industry is arguably the biggest on the planet. I mean, it's and the African community probably wants to borrow a few things from the Germans. And of course, it's a good time for me to remind anybody who's tuning in that this live stream has been brought to you in partnership with Frankfurter Buchmesse and with funding from the German Federal Office. I need to put that in there because they are the ones who are allowing us to do what you're doing here. So yeah, I just wanted to know from you, Antje. We know we're trying to borrow from best practices. Would you like to describe the German publishing industry for us so we know how your industry works? Maybe we are more similar than we think, especially for a writer who's coming in.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you something that really helped me as a writer, that I really cherish how the things are in Germany. There are several components that make it possible to live rather okay as a writer, and which I don't find in other countries so much. First of all, there is this network of that is rather big. Like you find a lot of fellowships, stipends, prizes, residencies all over the country, and they're on all levels. Like you have these big prizes, two big major prizes: the Frankfurt Book Fair, the German Book Prize, and the Leipziger Buchpreis, and they have an impact that also go across the border into other countries, have an impact on other countries. But then there are prizes on the regional level, or prizes, literature prizes for certain genres, for poetry, for crime, for short stories, also for beginners who begin to write for the first book. And there are lots of fellowships, like you can get a working fellowship. You have to apply for it, of course. You can get a residency in an art house or a literature house. You go there, stay for a couple of months, and get paid for. That helps a lot if you don't sell like hundreds and thousands of copies of books. That's very helpful. What else? And then I think what's very unique is also how the readings are organized. Like reading as such, I think is a very German thing. I mean, there are readings in the US, of course, I know, also in other countries, but not to this extent, and also not so partly so well funded. Of course, there are a lot of bookstores who still organize readings, and they pay for it. I mean, I've heard from a writer in the US that they sometimes have to rent. I don't know how it is, but
wait, the writer is paid.
The writer has to rent, not in Germany, but I heard from a friend in the US, they have to rent a bookstore in order to present their book, because it's considered to be commercial. In Germany, you get paid for it. They pay for the hotel, they pay for the travel costs, and they pay in honorarium. Of course, it depends, if you go to a small town, a small bookstore, they can't afford a big honorarium, but they still pay something. And then there are bigger bookstores or chains, they can pay more. Then you have literature houses in the big cities. All they do, or what they are supposed to do, is to get literature out into the public, present books, present writers. They have lots of programs. They also have writing programs. They have workshops. They have readings and all that. So this is, I think, a very important and well-funded, taxpayers' money funded network. And that I find unique. And the same goes actually for translators. Like in the last, 10 years, the awareness of the importance of translation also has grown. And there's also a well-funded network for translation and translators. Like translators can get funded for a certain project. Also, publishing houses can get funded if they translate a book that comes from a language that's not so common, or it's not so, easy to sell maybe. So this is something that I think is very important, and also, I profit from it as a writer, of course.
Maaza, I know that you're based in the US right now, but you actually are Ethiopian, and you have followed the industry back in Ethiopia. Do you want to tell us a bit about Ethiopia?
Well, the Ethiopian literary industry is, there are writers there, there are poets there. There is, I believe, really an explosion of the arts, a renaissance happening in Ethiopia right now. But there is not really an ecosystem that supports writers. Writers are doing this on their own. There's books that, my book had to be brought in from the UK into Ethiopia. There's not really there's the publishing industry, it is just beginning at this point to really start to grow. And I think that there are people there on the ground working to make that happen. I'm working with certain people to develop more of an outreach for these writers that are based in Ethiopia, and also bringing writers into Ethiopia to have discussions. And all of this is starting to come up. But Ethiopia's history has been a history of, it's been literary. It has one of the oldest written alphabets, but it's also seen a series of civil wars and wars that have eliminated entire populations of educated people. The Italians came in 1935, and one of the things that they did was make sure that they killed all college-educated people. They wanted to strip that country of education, of any knowledge that would, create some level of greater resistance. The revolution in the 70s did the same thing. College students and high school students and people who are called the elite intelligentsia were wiped out, either through imprisonment or in exile. So again, it's growing. Now we have this generation that is coming up, and I think that there are real champions on the ground in Ethiopia doing this, and I'm excited and eager to help in any way that I can.
I think I read about this civil war, the 70s beneath the Lion's Gates. You brought it out there. You actually were the editor for Addis Ababa Noir. How were you able to pull it off? Because if the system doesn't exist the way it exists in other parts of like in Germany, how are you able to pull it off?
Well, the publisher is an American publisher. I could find the writers in Ethiopia. I could find them across the diaspora, and that made it possible. But now the book is going to be published, distributed in Ethiopia with an independent publisher in the country. It may take a few years to really get that going, maybe 1 or 2 years to make that happen, but it's going to happen. So that is also something that's exciting.
Oh, that's really good to hear. I've been getting comments, Burgos saying hello, and other things like that. Hello, Burgos. Hello, Wanjala, Emmanuel, Jesemuse, welcome to the live stream. Antje, you mentioned that there's something for translators. That's really working for translators. And I look at your body of work. There's quite a bit of translation. How did you get into this?
How did I get into this? Actually, I discovered a book in a secondhand bookstore. It was called Democracy, and I found it very strange that a novel called Democracy, what a big word for a novel. So I got very curious and started to read it, and I just had read the first page, and I was so taken by it that I couldn't stop reading it. It was Joan Didion's novel, Democracy. And I found her so exciting that I really wanted to translate her all of a sudden, because I thought if I translate her, I really understand her from the depth. I understand what she's doing to achieve this, what I so liked in her writing, this precision and timing and rhythm and everything. And then I just found out that the rights to this famous Year of Magical Thinking were bought by Ullstein Publishing House here, and I asked them if I can translate it, and this is how I started. And since then, I was lucky enough to always being able to translate things that I really like, when I really am so excited about the text that I want to find out how it sounds in German when I bring it into the German language. And to me, translation is also something to, or a way to understand myself and my own work better, because in comparison, in this kind of close comparison to another writing style, to another aesthetic concept, it helps me to understand myself. That's why I really like to do it even parallel. Like I can write in the morning and translate in the afternoon.
And I see you do translations from English and Swedish as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is there a story? I mean, are you a big fan of ABBA, or how do you?
Is there a story?
Yeah. Why Swedish? I mean, why not Romanian or Hungarian?
Good question. I mean, I've been asked that quite a lot. Okay, you think English, everybody can speak English. That's why English is not the question here.
Yes.
Okay, English is easy, but Swedish, yeah, I don't know.
English. We understand English because of the history. But
okay.
Swedish, you have to ask questions.
Okay. Yeah, Swedish, I don't know. I mean, I can't give you a story, but I don't know if that really explains it. In the East, when I was a child, I was always standing with my parents, not always, but like in the summer, standing with my parents at the Baltic Sea, at the shore, and there was this white, glittering, beautiful ferry leaving into the horizon, like going away into the horizon and disappearing behind somewhere. And there was this mysterious country that I couldn't reach. Like nobody could go there. It was the West, of course. You couldn't go there. So this image of the disappearing paradise, you can say, kind of seduced me to go to Sweden rather soon. And then, I don't know why, when I went there for the first time or second time, I felt like I've lived there before. The nature and the atmosphere, they resonated with me. And I started to get more and more interested in the country. And then I started to learn the language. And I guess that's why. And then I also wanted to read, of course, the literature in the original. And but I don't know if that's the answer. That's maybe one of the answers.
That's your answer. Maaza, I know you write in English, but you speak several European languages.
Just Italian.
Oh yeah. So just the Italian.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you considered writing in that language?
Not really. You know, a few years ago, I translated or tried to translate just a part of an Italian text. It was a graphic novel. And I was asked if this was something I would be interested in doing. And I thought, you know, these graphic novels don't have many words. So, of course, yeah, I can do this. And once I got started in it, it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. Even with these little boxes that had 2 words, I realized, oh my God, you know, you're not just translating words, you're translating meaning, intent, all the other emotions that came before it. And it was probably one of the more challenging things I have done. And that gave me so much more or renewed respect for translation, because I have so much respect for translators, but to actually work or try to work in the trenches, so to speak, and see how the work gets done was a revelation for me. At times I think, well, maybe I can try to do something really short, and then I remember that experience and I say, I need a lot of time in order to try to do something like that. But I haven't yet written in Italian, but I've been working with my Italian translator for my novel, The Shadow King, very closely. And I have been absolutely thrilled to see the way that the process has developed and how she's working with certain Amharic words into Italian concepts. And that has been really fascinating for me.
Antje, I mean, I just wanted, I mean, for writers, you must talk about conflict. Maaza, you seem to have a lot of conflict that you can mine from. I'm interested, Antje, you have this wonderful novel, Tupelov 134, about a hostage situation that came out in 2004. And I'm just, please tell us about this novel, because it sounds really interesting. I started reading a bit about it. And, you know, this is a very interesting conflict that I thought, you know, you want to talk a little bit about.
Yeah, of course. It's the only book I wrote so far that is based on a real story, actually. In 1978, there was a hijacking. 2 East Germans hijacked an airplane that was leaving Poland, actually supposed to go back to East Germany, but they hijacked it into West Berlin. And the reason for that was because they wanted to flee with the help of a West German guy who had passports for them, and they were supposed to meet in Poland, in Gdansk, and this guy never came. And these 2 East Germans are stranded or were stranded in Poland, and they knew if they would fly back to East Germany, probably the Secret Service would be waiting for them, because they were afraid that this West German guy got caught by the Secret Service. So their plans got caught. And so it was just an impulse that they bought a toy gun and hijacked this airplane into the West. And what I found so interesting, besides the fact that I had no idea that this happened, I mean, I was a child when it happened, but I also asked around, nobody remembered this case. And it was a big thing, because it was in the middle of the Cold War. It was a huge conflict, actually, between the Soviets and the Americans, because they were both, I mean, they occupied Berlin on both sides. And they were flying this plane into the American zone. And shortly before, there was the Mogadishu hijacking, like this case where the airplane was hijacked to Mogadishu. And the Soviets and the Americans, they agreed to give each other the hijackers. It's how to say.
They exchanged the hijackers.
Exactly, thank you. To exchange their hijackers. But since West Germany said there's no border between East and West, and you can come, you East Germans, you can come over the border anytime, we don't acknowledge this border. It was also a tricky situation. There were so many political interests involved. And there was a court even built on this Tempelhof airport with the Americans. There was an American judge. There were West Germans involved, but with an American judge. So it was a big case, and I was totally fascinated by that. But then I also asked myself, what can I contribute to that? Why would I write about it? I'm not a writer of historical novels. I write more out of my present time. And then I realized it is actually also a question of how do we narrate historical events, like, or actually reinvent historical events by narrating them. And this was my take on this case, how I wrote about it. So I also involved myself into this book, or I'm as a narrator, or I'm as an author, a part of the narration.
Wow.
Answer yourself. Do you wanna? Because I could see you nodding when you know the historical.
I mean, I think that act of re-narration is itself. It's sometimes so much of what history is just only parts of the narrative that are shown to us. And so what you're talking about with that act of re-narrating something is even pulling out details and facts that were never known, you know, in a historical memory. So I find that I mean, this is really the main point that I think the main reason I write historical novels is that act of re-narrating something helps to establish or sometimes correct a second history, and that feels like an important reason all on its own. And that story sounds absolutely incredible. I can imagine what it was like to write it, but I also find it fascinating that you've put yourself into the story. So you're both a writer and a character in this work that's historically based and fiction.
Exactly, like in the way of asking how it could have been, and then jumping also back and forth between the different characters and taking on different angles. And you have, and I mean, I like to play with the role of the author in general. So that's nothing. I mean, it is special in this case because it has this historical core or historical center. But to play with the role of the writer or the author is always kind of fun. But here it's also like you have certain scenes and you tell them from different perspectives, and they turn into totally different scenes. And you have all these possibilities next to each other, and they're all true, but they're all limited true. And this is what I find interesting. But I mean, in a way, you also develop another or a second or third truth about something that is probably also already been written about, and now we have another version.
Yeah, that's great.
How was it for you, Maaza? You know, picking the places that you picked to be your historical narration.
Picking the place to be my.
How did you pick the points in history that you used?
Oh, well.
How did you pick the points in history that you wanted to narrate?
It's the first novel, 1974, during the revolution, felt like an automatic, a very straightforward choice, because there were so many memories that I had of Ethiopia during those early years, and it was one of the reasons that my family had to leave Ethiopia. And I think it's often inevitable for all of us to sit down at some point in our lives and say, how did I get here? What took me? What were all the paths that took me to this place? And for me, it always led back to the revolution. And I had enough knowledge, direct knowledge of it, that I could write that. I had a sense that I wanted to write this story about 1935 as a novel, but I knew that I didn't know how to research yet. I didn't know how to write a book. I didn't know enough about writing, I felt, to tackle that. I wanted to write that second book because my family had been involved in this war. I grew up with stories of the men in my family, but didn't really understand the role of women in it until I started researching. But both of those things were closely connected to my own childhood, so they felt natural to do. And now, when I'm thinking about what's next, I realize that these two were the things that I felt I had to write, and now it feels like my imagination is freed to really go anywhere that I would like it. It's not bound by childhood stories or childhood memories. And that feels like an interesting place to be. Like, who knows what I'll do next.
I know that you need to leave, Maaza, and I want to say thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you.
So what I'll do is I'll ask each of you to just give a little closing statement of what you've experienced here. What do you think of this kind of an initiative? And I'll start with you, Maaza, because you're the one who needs to leave immediately.
Okay. Well, I am really grateful for this opportunity to be in conversation with Antje and to hear more about your work. I'm fascinated by everything that you've said. So I hope that we get a chance to meet in person one day. But this has been an incredibly inspiring moment for me. This conversation has been fantastic. And James, thank you for inviting me to do this. I think we need to have more of these conversations that cross borders, but really, bring us together in the many ways that our imaginations intersect. So this is great.
Antje?
I totally agree. I also find it very interesting and fascinating. And I actually had the feeling we just started. So I want to talk a bit more now, and I will be very sad to switch off this computer.
I know.
Maybe we can continue. What we can do is we can exchange contacts, and maybe we can have a conversation after the fact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in my close, say thank you so much, Maaza and Antje, for agreeing to be on the stream today. I want to say thank you to our partners, Frankfurt Buchmesse, as you can see they're over there, who helped us source the guests, as well as the federal government of Germany, who provided funding for this event. And I'd like to say thank you to the guests who actually streamed in and made comments. I'm really grateful that you did so. And I'm hoping that both of you have a nice evening. I'm going to be sharing your contacts with each other after this, if you don't mind. Do you mind?
Exactly.
Not at all.
Great. Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you so much, ladies.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.